The Papah Trail. Let's go, 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 go. Yeah, 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 yeah. For the love of money, niggas come around. For the love of money, some stay around. For the love of money, what a nigga will do for the love of the money.
Recently, over 3 million more pages of the Epstein files were released to the public. While much of the shocking content was expected, what caught many off guard was that some of the files mentioned Bitcoin. And this has sparked countless headlines across crypto news outlets and sent social media into a frenzy. There's been a wave of viral posts on X and Reddit making all kinds of claims, some more credible than others. Some say that Epstein spoke with Bitcoin's creators, others point to him telling people not to buy BTC, and a few even speculate that Epstein was Satoshi Nakamoto all along. That's why today we're diving deep into the files to see exactly what they say about Bitcoin and what it could all mean for crypto's future. My name is Guy, and you're watching the Coin Bureau. Now, given the sensitive nature of today's subject matter, I need to make a few things absolutely clear. First, advisor, and nothing in this video should be considered financial investment or legal advice. This video is for educational purposes only, and it's intended to inform you about the links between crypto and the Epstein files. Second, we are not here to discuss Jeffrey Epstein himself, nor are we here to discuss any of his crimes. If you made it this far into the video, then you probably already know something about them already, but if not, well, feel free to Google them on your own time. Be warned though, it's not pretty. And third, we are not here to make accusations about any individuals or groups that may or may not have been associated with Epstein. Again, feel free to connect those dots on your own. This is a crypto channel, folks, and today we're focusing purely on the crypto aspect of this story. So, With that long disclaimer out of the way, let's get to it. Now, as you'll no doubt know, people everywhere have been pushing for the Epstein files to be made public for years. These files date back to the early 90s and contain all the evidence gathered by US law enforcement during their investigation into Epstein's revolting crimes. This evidence includes court filings, legal records, email conversations, flight logs, images, videos, interview notes, and everything in between. Essentially anything with a paper trail. Now, it wasn't until the 18th of November 2025 that the US government passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, requiring the Department of Justice, or DOJ, to release all the files to the public. Then, on the 19th of December 2025, the DOJ released its first batch of Epstein files, but the release drew bipartisan criticism. Not only was the number of files released small compared to the total number supposedly collected, but they were also heavily redacted, revealing very little information. Some pages were completely blacked out, literally showing nothing at all. However, far more information was made public on the 30th of January this year, when the DOJ released over 3 million pages of additional Epstein-related files. For context, the DOJ had previously stated there were around 6 million pages in total, but insisted that it had met its legal obligations and that this latest release would be the final one. Food for thought. In any case, this batch of Epstein files revealed all kinds of wild details, most of which you've probably seen plastered across the news and social media already. And if you're in crypto, you'll note that these emails contained many mentions of Bitcoin and indeed crypto more broadly. This has everyone in the industry asking questions they never thought they'd need to ask. Did Epstein help fund Bitcoin's early development? Which key crypto personalities visited the island? Did Epstein know Satoshi Nakamoto's true identity, or was Satoshi actually Jeffrey Epstein all along? And it's worth repeating that Epstein's ties to crypto aren't limited to Bitcoin. The files also reveal potential links to other crypto projects and a handful of crypto companies. Don't worry though, we'll dive back into all of this later on. Needless to say though, crypto Twitter has been busy losing what's left of its collective mind over all this, and it's easy to see why. It's also worth pointing out that people are still combing through the released files, trying to connect the dots on Epstein's crypto links. So we can probably expect more details to emerge, especially if the DOJ releases the remaining Epstein files, though let's face it, that seems unlikely. But if you're looking to keep up with these developments in real time, then why not join the Coin Bureau's Telegram channel? That's where we share the latest breaking news, provide deep dive alpha, and give you the most important market updates, all pinged directly to your device so you don't miss a thing. So sign up today using the link in the description or the QR code on screen now. All right then, now that you've got a rough idea of what's been going on, let's take our first step down the rabbit hole, starting with Jeffrey Epstein's connections to Bitcoin. One of the most surreal revelations in the files is just how early Epstein was aware of Bitcoin. For instance, one file shows a September 2012 email from Epstein saying, quote, "The Bitcoin guys said they didn't mind having to go to jail. Sorry, not me." Well, that aged like milk, huh? Anyways, what's crazy is that Epstein contacted early Bitcoin developer Gavin Andresen in June 2011, requesting a phone call just 2 days before Andresen infamously visited the CIA headquarters to discuss Bitcoin. What's crazy is that this all happened just weeks after Satoshi had stepped back, handpicking Andresen as his successor. Now, the trail here seems to go cold, but it does suggest that intelligence agencies could have been involved with Bitcoin even from the start. Regardless, in 2013, Epstein was forwarded an email that simply read, quote, "You might like this." The attached email had originally been sent to a group of wealthy tech figures, including Bill Gates, the world's second richest person at the time. It contained an analysis of Bitcoin and its future potential. Basically, the email described BTC as having no intrinsic value, driven solely by speculation. However, it also included quotes from various investors, with many showing excitement about Bitcoin's potential to disrupt the legacy finance system. Safe to say, Epstein seems to have been a speculator. That's because the files reveal that in 2015, Epstein helped MIT Media Lab director Joichi Ito fund MIT's Digital Currency Initiative, or DCI. This is significant because at the time, the DCI was a major funding source for Bitcoin's primary development team, Bitcoin Core. What's crazy is that Ito emailed Epstein explaining that, at the time, the Bitcoin Core team consisted of 5 core developers, including Gavin Anderson, Vladimir van der Laan, and Corey Fields, plus around 100 additional contributors. Ito outlined how the Bitcoin Core team was being paid by the non-profit Bitcoin Foundation. However, in 2015, a newly elected board member said the foundation was effectively bankrupt, and subsequent statements from Anderson and others confirmed it was under severe financial stress. So, MIT's Media Lab quickly stepped in, and those 3 core developers joined the Media Lab team. Ito described this as, quote, a big win for us. Now, here is where things get spicy. MIT had previously claimed that Epstein donated a total of $850,000 to the research facility, with $525,000 going to the Media Lab. However, in 2019, an investigative journalist alleged that Epstein and his associates had actually contributed much more, as much as $7.5 million. Whatever the amount, the key takeaway is, though, that some of the MIT Media Lab gift funds linked to Epstein were used to support the DCI, which paid the salaries of several Bitcoin Core developers. This means that Epstein's money indirectly helped fund Bitcoin's development for years. That said, though, it's extremely important to note that investment in Bitcoin Core does not mean controlling Bitcoin in any way. More importantly, there's no evidence that Epstein influenced the team's technical roadmap or governance, and he does not appear to have steered Bitcoin's direction in any visible way. It's also important to note that Epstein wasn't always a strong believer in Bitcoin's potential. As is the case with speculators, his interest in Bitcoin fluctuated over the years. For instance, in 2014, he had an email exchange with billionaire investor Peter Thiel. In that email, Epstein wrote that, quote, there is little agreement on what Bitcoin is, store of or intrinsic value, currency, property, architecture, payment system, etc. Conflicting goals, anonymous but transparent, before making a bizarre comparison to gender identity. After BTC's price surged in 2017, Epstein was asked directly if Bitcoin was still worth buying. He replied with one word, no. Now, keep in mind, at the peak of the 2017 bull market, BTC didn't even top $20,000. Not financial advice, but there's probably a lesson in there somewhere, right? Now, as you can imagine, social media was set ablaze after this was all discovered, creating the perfect environment for trolls to spread fake news and add even more to the chaos. One of the wildest rumors to go viral is the obviously false theory that Jeffrey Epstein was actually Satoshi Nakamoto. This rumor was sparked by an image that went viral, apparently showing a 2008 email from Epstein to now convicted partner in crime Ghislaine Maxwell. The fake email reads, quote, Ghislaine, the Satoshi pseudonym is working perfectly. Our little digital goldmine is ready for the world. Funding secured. Jeffrey. The post has millions of views, thousands of likes, and hundreds of retweets. And to be fair, it's easy to see why. At first glance, it looks like a legit email. On closer inspection, though, you'll notice that it has two lines where one should be the subject line instead. And if you search the Epstein files on the DOJ's website, you'll find no such email exists. People really will do anything for likes these days. That said, though, Epstein did claim to have contacted Satoshi Nakamoto. In 2016, he emailed 2 Saudi contacts proposing 2 ideas: a digital currency for the Middle East, likely a stablecoin, and a Sharia-compliant crypto based on Bitcoin. He then claimed to have, quote, spoken to some of the founders of Bitcoin, who were apparently very excited about the idea. Sure. To be clear, these emails don't prove that Epstein actually spoke with Satoshi or that he knew Satoshi's true identity. However, they do show that Epstein knew enough about Bitcoin's infrastructure to propose replicating and modifying it, either making it compliant with religious laws or making it a usable alternative monetary system. In any case, this raises the question, does it bring us closer to uncovering Satoshi's true identity? The short answer is yes and no. If Epstein did have contact with Satoshi like he claims, the fact that he referred to Bitcoin's founders, plural, suggests that Satoshi may actually be more than one person. Assuming that's true, which seems unlikely, then this aligns with years of speculation that Bitcoin was too complex for a single mind to come up with. Not to mention the Bitcoin white paper repeatedly uses we instead of I. So, who could the real person or people be? Well, as you probably know, people have been guessing at Satoshi's identity for well over a decade, and numerous names have been tossed into the mix along the way. To bring you up to speed, here are some of the strongest contenders. The first is Hal Finney, who was involved in Bitcoin before it even launched and was even the first person to ever receive a Bitcoin transaction. Another contender is Nick Szabo, an OG cypherpunk who suggested a digital peer-to-peer currency called BitGold in 2005. Another is Adam Back, who created Hashcash, which Bitcoin's proof of work is based on. Back is even mentioned by Satoshi in the Bitcoin white paper. And there's also Len Sassaman, a cypherpunk cryptographer with an interest in privacy tech, who sadly passed away in 2011, shortly after Satoshi stepped away from Bitcoin. And there are also theories that Satoshi was British, based on British spellings he used in his writings, and the fact that a headline from The Times, a UK newspaper, was engraved in the Genesis block, the first block ever mined on the Bitcoin blockchain. However, all of these are speculative guesses, each with their own evidence to suggest that they're not actually Satoshi. So for now, the true identity of Bitcoin's creator remains a mystery, but we can be sure it wasn't Jeffrey Epstein. Now, something else that's been brought to light in the Epstein files is the various investments he made in different crypto companies. But before we get into those, I'll reiterate what I mentioned earlier. We're not here to pass judgment on anyone who interacted with Epstein in any way. In other words, any names mentioned from here on shouldn't be taken as accusations of any wrongdoing. All we're focusing on are the documented facts surrounding these investments and deals. With that in mind, one of the most talked about investments from the Epstein files involves Blockstream. As it happens, Epstein participated in the $18 million oversubscribed seed round for Blockstream back in 2014. Specifically, Epstein made a personal investment of $50,000 through a fund linked to Joy Ito, who you'll recall was the director of the MIT Media Lab at the time. That fund took a small minority stake in Blockstream's seed round, but not before Epstein's initial investment was bumped up to $500,000 instead of $50,000. Anyhow, this investment raised several eyebrows, and shortly after the latest batch of files were made public, Blockstream's CEO, the aforementioned Adam Back, took to X to make a statement. Back basically confirmed Epstein's indirect involvement with Blockstream, but also added that, quote, a few months later, Ito's fund divested its Blockstream shares due to a potential conflict of interest and other concerns. Blockstream has no direct nor indirect financial connection with Jeffrey Epstein or his estate. Meanwhile, another controversial detail that's come to light is that an Epstein-related entity invested around $3 million in Coinbase in 2014, the same year as the Blockstream investment. This isn't too surprising, though. Epstein was known for putting money into just about anything. Intriguingly, though, the investment opportunity was actually presented to Epstein by Brock Pierce, a co-founder of both venture firm Blockchain Capital and USDT issuer Tether. Now, at the time of Epstein's 2014 investment, Coinbase was obviously much smaller than it is today, valued at just $400 million at the time. Epstein reportedly sold 50% of his stake in 2018 for $15 million, a very nice return on his initial investment. It's unclear if or when he sold the remaining 50%, but by then he'd already pocketed millions in gains. Now, when it comes to Epstein's connections to altcoins, there are a few worth highlighting. The first is his connection to Zcash, a leading privacy coin. In 2018, Epstein received an email from Madars Virza, a research scientist who had worked with Joy Ito at the MIT Media Lab. In a nutshell, Virza wrote that Zcash was about to fork. He noted that all his coins were still held by the company and suggested they consider withdrawing their allocation to potentially benefit from both forks. The second and third altcoins Epstein had connections to are Ripple and Stellar. In a July 2014 email titled "Stellar Isn't So Stellar," Blockstream co-founder Austin Hill told Epstein that Blockstream was unhappy about his investments in both Ripple and Stellar. In his words, quote, "Ripple and Jed's new Stellar are bad for the ecosystem we are building, and it does our company damage to have investors who are backing two horses in the same race." Hill even added a warning saying he'd been asked by other co-founders to, quote, "reduce or take your allocation away." Now, at this point, you might be thinking that Ethereum probably also has connections to Epstein, given how it exploded onto the scene in 2015, right when Epstein appears to have been pretty active in the crypto space. However, ETH holders out there will be relieved to know that Ethereum is barely mentioned at all in the Epstein files. Although something that's truly fascinating is that Masha Drakova, a Russian-born investor and US-based VC, wrote to Epstein in 2017 claiming to have found a young blockchain developer in Russia who, quote, "could become better than Vitalik Buterin if he focused on technology," and offered to connect the two. This makes you wonder whether Vitalik himself was contacted first but refused to be trapped, prompting Drakova to try and find a Vitalik 2.0. But this is purely speculation, and it's not clear if an alternative Vitalik was ever contacted. Still, it's good to know that Vitalik himself was never captured. Okay, so with everything we've covered today, you might be asking yourself at this point whether Bitcoin has been compromised in some way. Well, the short answer is no, despite all the FUD circulating on social media. Newsflash, Bitcoin doesn't have a senior management position, and even if Epstein had financial involvement with Bitcoin Core, suggesting he influenced its code simply isn't true. Moreover, Bitcoin Core commits surged post-2015 due to debates around scaling, SegWit, and the Lightning Network. So all of those GitHub commits were related to things that had no impact on Bitcoin's core ethos, pun intended. Still, all this Epstein talk does raise questions about Bitcoin's image, and honestly, it is a bit of a setback. Even if Bitcoin itself wasn't affected directly, the fact that it's mentioned in the Epstein files isn't exactly flattering. And let's face it, crypto has a bad enough image problem as it is. However, there is an important silver lining to this. Despite all the disgusting activity detailed in the Epstein files, there's no evidence that crypto was used to finance any of it. This may surprise some, given Bitcoin's past ties to criminal activity, but thankfully, crypto isn't cast as a villain here, which, well, makes a change. This matters more than you might think because it means the investors paying the closest attention, like institutions, likely haven't had their perception of Bitcoin shaken by these events. If Bitcoin has survived the collapse of major exchanges like Mt. Gox and FTX, internal debates like the block size wars, and monsters like Jeffrey Epstein, then a few regulatory changes in 2026 and beyond will be a walk in the park by comparison. Institutions are forward-looking. Once the Epstein dust settles, those decades-old emails will barely register. Although, if more files are released in the future, we could see new information emerge, information that could potentially make things more challenging for the crypto industry. So, fingers crossed we've already seen the worst, because all things considered, crypto hasn't come off too badly from all of this. Even if some key players in crypto have been implicated in the files in some way. Still, it's reassuring to know that even as we enter a bear market, it's not because of any crypto-specific failures. So take comfort in knowing that Bitcoin will still be around in the future, stronger than ever and ready to rally to new all-time highs in the next bull market. Until then, though, we're probably going to see some crazy downside. So strap in, folks, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. All right, that's all from me for today. If you want to see how institutions really feel about crypto in 2026, then check out the video right over here. And if you want to see what challenges Bitcoin could face in the year ahead, check out the video right over here. Okay, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you again soon. This is Guy, signing off.
Directed energy weapons designed to neutralize hypersonic threats is not simply a shield, the largest stimulus package ever conceived. But the real numbers circulating through the prime contractors, Lockheed, tell a story of a $1.1 trillion injection into the American aerospace sector. This is Keynesian economics wearing combat boots. The United States is printing money to reindustrialize its defense base, creating a closed-loop economy where federal spending drives technological dominance. However, a shield of this magnitude requires more than just money and technology. It requires geography. This brings us to the physics of war that has suddenly turned the Arctic into the most contested real estate on Earth. If you trace the trajectory of a hypersonic glide vehicle launched from the Eurasian landmass toward the North American industrial heartland, the math is unforgiving. The shortest path does not cross the Pacific or the Atlantic, it crosses the North Pole. To intercept these threats during their boost phase, the only moment they are truly vulnerable, you cannot rely on interceptors based in Kansas. You need real estate in the Arctic Circle. This is the brutal logic behind the pressure campaign on Greenland. When Washington threatened 10% tariffs on European imports, escalated to 25%, it was not a trade dispute regarding automobiles or steel. It was a hostage negotiation regarding physics. The ultimatum delivered to Denmark and the European Union was stark. Grant the United States sovereign-level access to Arctic launch sites, or watch your export economies be crushed by the weight of American protectionism. This is the new geometry, is an outdated doctrine. They are seeking to restore the nuclear monopoly of the 1940s, a state of existence where they can strike anywhere but cannot be struck in return. But the price of this immunity is the sovereignty of their allies. Europe, already buckling under economic stagnation, blinked. The framework deal announced shortly after the tariff threat is not a treaty among friends. It is a concession agreement signed by a junior partner. The message sent to every capital from Berlin to Tokyo is clear. You are no longer partners in a global project. Your tenants living on American strategic property, and the landlord has just raised the rent. While the diplomats wrestle with the military implications, a second, perhaps more devastating war is being fought in the energy markets. We call this the Watt War, the artificial intelligence revolution which drove the stock market valuations of the mid-2020s has collided with the laws of thermodynamics. Data centers are not clouds. They are physical factories that consume electricity with the appetite of aluminum smelters. The training of a single next-generation model requires gigawatts of consistent baseload power. This is where the divergence between Fortress America and the rest of the West becomes fatal. For the last decade, Europe has invested trillions in a green transition focused on intermittent renewables, wind and solar, which are ideologically pure but physically inconsistent. The United States, under the guise of energy dominance, has taken a different path. The deregulation drive of 2025 was not about removing red tape for the sake of ideology. It was a strategic mobilization of resources by fast-tracking natural gas pipelines, uncapping oil production, and most critically using categorical exclusions to bypass environmental reviews for new nuclear reactors. The United States has created an energy arbitrage of historic proportions. American industry now pays a fraction for energy compared to their German or British counterparts. The result is a hollowing out of the European industrial base. Manufacturers are not moving to America because they love the culture. They are moving because they cannot mathematically survive in a jurisdiction where electricity prices fluctuate wildly based on the weather. The United States is winning the AI race not because of better code, but because of better physics. They have the power to run the machines, and they are refusing to share it. This energy dominance feeds directly back into the geopolitical leverage. When Donald Trump mocked the European Green Deal, he wasn't just scoring political points. He was highlighting a strategic trap that Europe built for itself. The continent dismantled its nuclear fleet and banned fracking, assuming a world of global cooperation where energy could always be imported. That world is gone. Now Europe finds itself caught between a hostile Russia, an indifferent Middle East, and a predatory United States that views its energy surplus not as a public good to stabilize the West, but as a competitive advantage to reshore global manufacturing. The fortress is not just keeping missiles out, it is sucking capital in. Nowhere is this shift from partner to vassal felt more acutely than in Canada. The relationship between Ottawa and Washington was once cited as the gold standard of international cooperation, the longest undefended border in the world, an integrated economy, a shared culture. But the ultimatum delivered at Davos exposed the fragility of that integration. When 75% of a nation's exports go to a single customer, that nation is not a sovereign state in economic terms. It is a branch plant. For decades, Canada relied on the friendship discount. They assumed that their strategic alignment with Washington meant they were exempt from the harsh realities of American protectionism. That discount has been canceled. The psychological shock to the Canadian political establishment cannot be overstated. Prime Minister Mark Carney's frantic attempts to rally a coalition of middle powers is a rational diplomatic response, but a weak economic one. A coalition of Canada, Japan, the UK, and Australia is a coalition of energy importers and demographic decliners. They are trying to pull their weaknesses to create strength. The reality is that capital markets have already priced in the new status quo. The Canadian dollar is decoupling from oil prices and trading on political risk. Investors are realizing that if the US border thickens, if tariffs are applied, even as a negotiating tactic, the Canadian business model collapses. The branch plant economy only works if the branch has access to the headquarters. Without that access, the assets are stranded. The realization that Canada is defenseless, both militarily and economically, without American benevolence, is the kind of existential dread that topples governments and rewrites constitutions. But if the immediate victim of this strategy is the Western alliance, the long-term beneficiary may well be the silent observer in the room, China. The narrative in Washington is that this fortress strategy is designed to contain Beijing. In reality, it may be handing them the keys to the rest of the world. The Chinese strategy in 2026 is not one of confrontation, but of patience. They're playing the role of the vulture capitalist, waiting for the distressed assets of the Western alliance to hit the market. Beijing's internal analysis of the Davos ultimatum is celebratory. For years, Chinese diplomats have toured the global South, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, selling a specific narrative that the West is hypocritical, that American talk of a rules-based order is a cover for hegemony, and that Washington has no friends-only servants by publicly humiliating its closest allies, by using tariffs as a weapon against friends, and by turning security into a transaction. The United States has confirmed every talking point in the Chinese propaganda handbook. Beijing doesn't need to outspend the US military. They just need to offer an alternative to US bullying. As the United States pulls inward, focusing on its Golden Dome and its domestic industrial boom, a vacuum is created in the global commons. We are seeing the acceleration of the BRICS plus bloc, not as a coherent ideological alliance, but as a union of the ostracized. Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, these nations are looking at the humiliation of Canada and Europe and drawing a simple conclusion. We must diversify. We cannot be dependent on a dollar system that can be weaponized at a whim. We cannot rely on supply chains that run through a fortress that might close its gates. The result is a fragmentation of the global economy. We are moving from a single integrated global market to a series of walled gardens. The United States will have the richest, most secure garden, but it will be a lonely one. This brings us to the ultimate paradox of the fortress trap. History is littered with empires that prioritized invulnerability over connectivity. The Great Wall of China, the Maginot Line, the Soviet Iron Curtain. These were all projects designed to create absolute security. In the short term, they worked. They kept the enemy out, but in the long term, they kept the future out. By insulating itself from the dangers of the world, the United States is also insulating itself from the vitality of the world. The network effect of the US dollar, the fact that it is used by everyone everywhere, depends on trust. It depends on the belief that the system is open and fair. When you turn the financial system into a weapon to enforce loyalty, you encourage your users to find a competitor. The Pyrrhic victory whispered about in the lounges of Davos is exactly this. The United States is winning the battle for 2026. Its economy is roaring, its borders are securing, and its enemies are deterred, but it is losing the war for 2036. By signaling that it cares only for its own hardened perimeter, it is forcing the rest of the world to organize without it. We are witnessing the end of the American empire and the birth of the American fortress. The empire was based on soft power, trade, and alliances. The fortress is based on hard power, energy, and intimidation. If the Golden Dome is the shield and the energy grid is the engine, we must now examine the fuel injection system, the United States dollar. To understand how Washington plans to pay for a $1.1 trillion defense layer while cutting taxes and deregulating industry, we have to leave the geopolitical map and enter the bond market. This is where the Fortress America strategy shifts from a military gamble to a financial high-wire act that terrifies every central banker from Frankfurt to Tokyo. The question whispered in the corridors of Davos was not just why are they doing this, but how are they affording this? The answer lies in a radical shift in monetary doctrine. For decades, the US Treasury operated on the assumption that debt mattered. The new doctrine, quietly adopted by the administration's economic team, is that debt is irrelevant as long as you control the underlying assets of the future by cornering the market on AI compute, energy production, and space-based defense. The United States is effectively securitizing its technological dominance. They are betting that global capital will have no choice but to flow into US treasuries, not because the balance sheet is healthy, but because it is the only safe harbor in a world set on fire. This is the dollar milkshake theory weaponized. As deindustrializes and China faces a demographic cliff, capital flees those jurisdictions. Where does it go? It goes to the fortress. The administration is counting on this influx of foreign capital to fund the Golden Dome. In essence, they are forcing the very allies they are alienating to pay for the wall being built between them. It is a cynical, brilliant, and incredibly dangerous feedback loop. Make the world more dangerous, so the world buys more of your safety. But this creates a secondary casualty. The euro-dollar system, the plumbing of global trade, relies on offshore dollars. Credit created by European and Asian banks to facilitate trade. By aggressive reshoring and sanctioning, Washington is drying up this liquidity. We are seeing the beginning of a liquidity crisis in the Eurozone that makes the 2008 crash look like a minor overdraft. European banks are sitting on portfolios of green assets that are plummeting in value while being starved of the dollar collateral they need to remain solvent. The rupture Mark Carney spoke of is not just diplomatic. It is a solvent crisis for the Western banking system outside of New York. While the nation-states argue, a new political entity has emerged fully formed from the chaos, the techno-industrials. In the 20th century, we had the military-industrial complex, a partnership between government and defense contractors. In 2026, we have something different. The fusion of the state and the algorithm. Look closely at the contracts for the Golden Dome. These are not traditional procurement deals. They are mandates that effectively grant companies like SpaceX, Palantir, and Anduril quasi-governmental status. When a private company controls the satellite constellation that provides the only early warning system for nuclear attack, that company is no longer just a vendor. It is a branch of government. This shift was visible at Davos. The tech CEOs were not there to lobby regulators. They were there to dictate terms. The narrative has shifted from regulation to integration. The Fortress strategy relies on the speed of Silicon Valley to outpace the mass of Beijing. To achieve this, Washington has effectively deputized big tech. Antitrust cases have been dropped. Mergers are approved in days. The message to Silicon Valley is simple. Help us build the shield and you can write your own rules. This has profound implications for the concept of democracy. We are moving toward a form of corporate Caesarism where critical infrastructure, currency, defense, energy is managed by a consortium of unelected technocrats aligned with the executive branch, bypassing the slow deliberation of Congress. For the average citizen, the trade-off is clear. You get safety, cheap energy, and a booming stock market, but you lose the ability to influence the machine. The Fortress is not a democracy. It is a command economy disguised as a free market. If the Arctic is the roof of the Fortress, Africa is the basement where the pipes are laid. The media ignores this front, but the commodity traders do not. The production of the Golden Dome's interceptors, the batteries for the AI data centers, and the alloys for the re-industrialized Navy require specific elements: cobalt, lithium, tantalum, and rare earths. For 20 years, the West allowed China to monopolize the African supply chain. That era of intelligence is over. The US response, however, is not to build schools and hospitals to win hearts and minds as the Chinese did. The US response is kinetic and transactional. We are seeing a surge of private military contractors securing mines in the Congo, Zambia, and Niger. This is the dark side of the green and AI revolution. The clean digital future of the West is built on the dirty kinetic reality of resource extraction in the South. The script for 2026 involves a series of proxy conflicts across the Sahel and Central Africa. These are not ideological wars. They are corporate takeovers with gunfire. The United States has signaled it will no longer tolerate Chinese exclusivity in critical minerals. When Washington speaks of diversifying supply chains, they mean seizing them. This puts African leaders in an impossible position. The non-aligned movement is being resurrected, but it is toothless against the raw pressure of the two superpowers. We're returning to a 19th century scramble for resources. But instead of flags, the invaders are planting mining rigs and server farms. The volatility in these regions will spike, sending shockwaves through the commodity markets. Smart money is already going long on defense stocks and mining conglomerates with US security clearance. We must turn the camera inward now. A fortress, by definition, restricts movement. It restricts the flow of goods, people, and ideas. The economic boom trumpeted by the administration is real, but it is uneven. We are witnessing the bifurcation of the American economy into the protected and the exposed. The protected are those inside the fortress walls, the aerospace engineers, the AI coders, the energy workers in the Perrin Basin, the owners of capital. For them, 2026 is a golden age. Wages are skyrocketing, asset prices are inflating, and the future looks bright. The exposed are those dependent on the old global order. The logistics workers at ports, handling fewer imports. The farmers who have lost their export markets in China and Europe due to retaliatory tariffs. The service sector workers, crushed by the inflation that comes from deglobalization. Inflation is the ghost in the machine. You cannot reindustrialize a continent-sized economy in 5 years without creating massive inflationary pressure. The cost of goods is rising. The administration's answer is to suppress data and control narratives, blaming foreign speculators for price hikes that are actually caused by domestic policy. The social contract is fraying. The Golden Dome protects against missiles, but it does not protect against civil unrest. The militarization of the border is not just about keeping migrants out, it is about keeping labor tight. The restriction on immigration is a deliberate lever to drive up wages for the essential industrial workforce, buying their loyalty while abandoning the service class. This is the personism with American characteristics that analysts are struggling to model. It is a populist, nationalist, industrial strategy that rewards loyalty to the project and punishes dissent. Strategy national actors. It assumes China will calculate the odds and retreat. It assumes Europe will grumble but submit. It assumes the American public will tolerate inflation in exchange for glory. But history is not driven by rational actors. It is driven by accidents. There are 3 specific black swans hovering over 2026 that could turn the fortress into a prison. First, a single point of failure. A coordinated state-sponsored attack on the US power grid or the satellite constellation does not need to destroy the hardware. It just needs to confuse the software. If the Golden Dome goes blind for 10 minutes, the entire geopolitical calculus collapses. The reliance on AI creates a vulnerability to data poisoning. The injection of false information that causes the system to attack itself or shut down. Second, the Saudi pivot. The petrodollar is already dying. The fortress strategy might kill it. If Saudi Arabia, seeing the US weaponize the dollar against Europe, decides to price oil exclusively in a basket of BRICS currencies, the inflation in the US goes from manageable to catastrophic. The US energy independence protects it physically, but the dollar's value is derived from global usage. If the world stops using dollars for oil, the trillion-dollar defense spending spree becomes a hyperinflationary death spiral. Third, the European collapse. Washington assumes Europe will stagnate but remain stable. This is Italy or France or a radical political revolution in Germany. The contagion will not stop at the Atlantic. A disorderly breakup of the EU would destroy the asset values of the US banking sector. You cannot bankrupt your biggest customer and expect your own revenue to stay flat. As we conclude this analysis of the Davos 2026 revelation, we are left with a picture of a world transformed. The global village of the 1990s has been razed. In its place stands a landscape of fortified citadels and lawless badlands. The United States has made a choice. It has chosen survival over leadership. It has chosen power over influence. It has chosen the certainty of steel and code over the ambiguity of treaties and trust. For the investor, the lesson is clear. Invest in the things the fortress needs: energy, computing, and critical minerals. When Mark Carney spoke of rupture, he was trying to warn us that the fabric of the world was tearing. He was right. Computing and critical minerals. Avoid the things that depend on the old world of free trade and open borders. For the citizen, the lesson is harder. The world is becoming sharper, colder, and more dangerous. The end of history has ended. History has returned with a vengeance, and it is wearing a suit of armor. When Mark Carney spoke of rupture, he was trying to warn us that the fabric of the world was tearing. He was right, but he was wrong about the outcome. The rupture is not an accident. It is the design. The United States is not drifting away from the world. It is actively pushing off from the dock. As the distance grows and the lights of the fortress fade into the mist of the Atlantic, the rest of the world must now answer the question that Trump threw in their faces. Can you survive without us? For the first time in 80 years, it might have to be yes, because the alternative is not partnership. The alternative is submission. And for nations with memory, submission is just a slower form of death. This is the state of our world, a trillion-dollar gamble, a shattered alliance, and a new empire rising not from expansion, but from isolation. Welcome to Financial History. Watch your portfolio, watch the Arctic, and most of all, watch the walls because they are closing.
It is kind of funny whenever I see something like this happen.
Elon Musk were here right now, what would you tell him?
Go back where you come from.
America or
Where he came from.
South Africa?
South Africa?
South Africa, right?
Oh, gotta go.
Yep.
Your interest in following the money, Jeffrey Epstein's money, how he made it, how he used it.
What I'm kind of blown away by from reviewing the documents thus far is the inclusion of suspicious activity reports from various financial institutions. And the suspicious activity reports comes directly from FinCEN. FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's part of the U.S. Treasury Department, and their job is to, combat money laundering and other financial crimes. And so, financial institutions, whenever they see signs of money laundering or financial crime, they send over to FinCEN a suspicious activity report. FinCEN then puts it into a database here. Those are impossible to get, first of all. You can't FOIA them. They're never usually introduced in court cases. But there are a whole bunch of them here in these files. They come in around 2019, and they show how some of the financial institutions, flagged Epstein's movement of money. And there's a lot of it there. And to me, that really stands out as a noteworthy document because it provides a bit of a roadmap to understand, one, how he was moving the money, why it may have been suspicious, and a deeper, potentially following it up in a much deeper way.
The other kind of component to this is, yes, there's absolutely a profit millionaires. They didn't get there by not having profit motives. So they also have just a bit of a control freak or God complex. I mean, there's some really crazy quotes from Soros talking about how he fancied himself a god, like when you can bankrupt entire countries by executing a couple of trades. And you might get some, messianic type feelings, which is the way he called it. He said he had some messianic fantasies. And then regarding like the glyphosates in the kind of the war on farmers, the takeover of the food supply and every other industry, really, that's about control, because control equals cash. I mean, they're monopolists. Bill Gates, especially, with Microsoft, you could see early on in the 90s. And into the 2000s, there was a lot of antitrust problems. He wanted to eliminate all the competition. That's what it looks like he's doing in the agriculture industry, because controlling the industry equals more cash for him and his investments. So regarding the glyphosates, and I don't know, I have not yet found conclusive proof that they want to create more sick people. But the outcomes sure show that. I mean, it's not really pharma is not really a cure industry; it's a treatment industry. So there's a lot of smoke there.
But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3.
He started as the boy genius behind Microsoft, the man who put a computer in every home and software in every office. But after making his billions, Bill Gates didn't just retire. He rebranded himself as a global philanthropist. He poured his fortune into health, agriculture, education.
Shake it. 12 at night to 5 in the morning, they don't give a fuck now. If it's for that money, niggas gon' bark and they bite like a motherfucking dog. Gotta try it like a motherfucking dog for that cat. I am gonna